Good morning, everyone. I have to report to you that I made a mistake for this morning. Our quarterly has us in chapter 3 of Daniel. And that's where Daniel's three friends are placed in the fiery furnace, and where Nebuchadnezzar in verse 25 says, he answered and said, "Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the fourth is like the Son of God." And later in verses 29 and 30 it says, "Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort." So I tell you this because I didn't have enough time to do the whole chapter. So that's kind of a little scenario there. What happened was I ended up doing chapter 2 inadvertently. But chapter 3 is important because it shows that he has a sudden change of heart. So he sees these events, and he has a sudden change of heart, and it's an epiphany about God, but it's not sudden. The seed about Jehovah was planted in chapter 2, which is where I was prepared for this morning. So at first when I realized my mistake, I was kind of upset that I had studied the wrong chapter, but then I realized how important it is to really look at chapter 2 and see how Daniel planted the seed for Nebuchadnezzar to understand that there is a true God that is all-powerful. So this morning we're going to do Daniel chapter 2, the first 30 verses. So Daniel 2:1 says, "And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him." Now it says he dreamed dreams. This is multiple. Several commentaries tell us that it is one dream that came in several parts. Other commentaries tell us that it is one dream that was reoccurring. In other words, he saw the same dream over and over. And that seems to be the predominant thought there, that he was seeing the same dream over and over to the point that his spirit was troubled. It becomes apparent that Nebuchadnezzar considered the dream important, but also that it was troubling to him and he needed to understand it. Some commentaries use the word terrifying. Now, when Nebuchadnezzar, tells of the dream later in the book of Daniel, in Daniel 4:5, it says, "I had a dream that made me afraid," which would imply that it was terrifying. "As I was lying in the bed, the images and visions that passed through my mind terrified me." And in Daniel 6:18, he says, "Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating, without any entertainment with being brought to him, and he could not sleep." So it troubled him to the point that he's not eating. His whole routine has changed up. So it must have been a very strong message that was coming to him. Now verses 2 and 3 tells us that then the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king, and the king said unto them, "I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream." Now, in this case, magicians refers to those, is translated as those who use their pen to record. In other words, or some type of writing device, meaning that these are men who are educated in writing, but they also understand the sacred writings of Babylon. Astrologers are those who study the stars. Sorcerers are those who are working in witchcraft, those who practice incantations, who gain their power supposedly from evil spirits. Now the phrase Chaldeans is used 2 different ways. Chaldeans, the general reference is to all the people of Babylon, but also it refers to a specific group of people who are reported to be the wisest men in the kingdom. So then it says, "For to show the king his dreams." Commentaries agree that this means one of 2 things: that the king would not tell the wise men the content of his dream, or the king could not remember the specifics of the dream, only that it frightened him. Most of the commentaries kind of agree that the king didn't tell them the dream, only that he had one, because he was testing them. Verse 3 says, "And the king said unto them, I dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream." So the question comes, I ask myself this question, that says, does God still use dreams to communicate his will with us today? And the answer is he can if he wants to, but in today's world, God guides us by his Holy Spirit when we pray to seek him in his word and or when we meditate on his word. Billy Graham once wrote, God can communicate through scripture, prayer, or other believers whom God uses to encourage us and help us understand his will. Billy Graham added, no matter which way he chooses to communicate, it reveals God's love, that God loves us, knows what is best for us, and he wants to show us. But in fact, when we come to Christ, God himself comes to live within us by his Holy Spirit, and one reason is so that he can guide us. And to emphasize this point, Billy Graham cited Psalms 32:8, which read, I will instruct you and teach you in the way that you should go. So applying this information to Nebuchadnezzar, God's trying to reach him. And as those two verses I mentioned earlier, the first part from chapter 3, he did reach him because he states that there is no other God like the Jehovah God of the Hebrew people. Now the danger with dreams is that they may not come from God. Jeremiah 23:30 and 32 say, therefore behold, I am against the prophets, saith the Lord, that steal my words, every one from his neighbors. In other words, the false prophet who interpret them for personal benefit. He says, behold, I am against the prophets, saith the Lord, that use their tongues and say, he saith, behold, I am against them that prophesy false dreams, saith the Lord, and do tell them and cause my people to err by their lives. Who, in other words, who guide us in the wrong direction by interpreting God's intent wrongly. He says, yet I sent them not, nor commanded them. God's telling us that sometimes we have to be very perceptive about what people are telling us. If they're telling us stuff that is not biblical, then these people are not of God. So in the case of Nebuchadnezzar, he ended up with Daniel. And we'll get there in just a second. So verse 4 says, then spake the Chaldeans, now this is the wise men, supposedly the wise men of the court, to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servant the dream, and we will show the interpretation. Now it's interesting that at this point in Daniel 2, verse 4, all the way through Daniel chapter 7, verse 28, the whole thing went from being in Hebrew to Aramaic. So the word Syriac is Aramaic. He's talking to the king in Aramaic. And this is the language that was spoken at the court of Nebuchadnezzar, and it's used as the official language of the whole western section of the Persian Empire. But the wise men asked the king to tell them the dream, and we will interpret it. Now, most charlatans, people who prey on people, watch your body language. They listen to what you say, and they can gain a whole lot of information from that. So what these guys want the preacher, the king, to do is tell us about your dream, and we're going to tell you what it means. But the king answers in verses 5 and 6. He answers, excuse me. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. In other words, the dream has left him. If ye will not make known unto me the dream, with the interpretation of the dream, ye shall be cut to pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. But if ye show the dream and the interpretation thereof, ye shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. The thing is gone from me. The Vulgate Bible words it this way: the word is departed from me. So he's kind of implying that the dream, the intent of the dream, the content of the dream is gone from him. Some commentaries imply that the king did not reveal the content of the dream. He's testing the wise men. So, So in verses 7 and 9, he goes on to say that the Chaldeans, they answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream. Again, the wise men are asking the king, tell us what your dream was about. And they go on to say, and we will give its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time is changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. Again, the king is telling him, All you are trying to do is gain time. You want me to tell you the dream, the content of the dream, what the dream was about, so you can come up with some answer of an interpretation. And the king's not buying in. He's telling them, you have to tell me what my dream is. If you're that smart, if you have all these things that are, tell you what's going on, then you can tell me what my dream was about. The wise men ask the king to tell them what the dream, so they can give it. The king responds to them by telling them that he sees that they are stalling for time, that they're waiting for the dream to come true, and that they would then be off the hook. So one, they're trying to stall for time, tell us the dream, and we will give you an interpretation, or they're wanting the dream to come true, and they say, see, there it happened. So, and then they'd be off the hook. But the king continues to tell them, if you don't tell me the dream, you certainly can't expect me to believe your interpretation. And despite their protest, Nebuchadnezzar didn't ask too much of these magicians. And as king, he's not asking too much for the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans, the wise men. These men made their living on their supposed ability to contact gods and spirits and gain the secrets from the spirit realm. If that's what their claim to fame is, then they should have been able to do it. And he's proven them wrong. If they were really able to do what they claimed to be able to do, they should be able to tell Nebuchadnezzar both the dream and its interpretation. So was the king suspicious of the wise men and their abilities? Had he grown to doubt their abilities? Had he lost confidence in them? Or was this God's plan so that the king would listen to Daniel, bring Daniel before him? So Nebuchadnezzar promised gifts if they delivered, but he also promised in verse 5, you should be cut to pieces and your houses be made a dunghill. This is not the only time that Nebuchadnezzar would make this promise. He made it in Daniel 3:29, where he says, therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, or language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. So we can see, that's my point about chapter 3. We see the result of what's happening in chapter 2. In verse 10 and 11, the Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. In other words, the wise men are telling him, there's no one on earth who can tell the king what his dream's all about. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldeans. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there's no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with the flesh. Their argument is the king's making an unreasonable request, that no man can know what his dream is unless the king tells them, that the only people who know what the king's dream was about are the gods, little g, and they're not dwelling with the flesh. In other words, they don't reveal their secrets to the flesh, the people, unless it's requested. The wise men tell the king that no one on earth can do what he's asking. No king has ever asked this before, and only the gods have this information. Basically, they're telling the king that he's being unreasonable, and what he's asked them to do was beyond mortal capabilities. Verses 8 through 13 demonstrate how impossible it is for humans to understand or to know God's will, Jehovah God, to interpret the dreams that come from God. Daniel 2:27 says, Daniel replied, no wise man, astrologer, magician, or wizard can tell the king such things. Now verses 12 through 13 say, for this reason the king was angry and very furious. He's angry because of what his wise men told him. They said, there is no man on earth who can tell the king this matter. So he's mad, he's angry, and he gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. He's had it. They can't do it, so destroy them. So the decree went out, and they began to killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Why Daniel and his three friends? Because they were included with the wise men. That when he became angry, he calls for their execution. Daniel 1:20 tells us, in all the matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in his realm. So in verse 120, we understand that they're already smarter than all the people that the king is talking to. And so they're included, if not above these guys. And so they're included in all those who are going to be executed, even though the king hasn't even talked to them yet. Verses 14 through 15 says, Then with counsel and wisdom Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, Why is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. Now Arioch is not only the captain of the king's guard, but he's the head executioner. Now, where it says with counsel and wisdom, counsel is interpreted as prudence. Excuse me. Wisdom is interpreted as discretion. So it says, with prudence and discretion, Daniel's asking the head executioner, why is this order so urgent or so hasty? Why are you such a hurry to do this? He's demonstrating his leadership. Daniel's demonstrating his leadership by handling this life or death. He's on the verge of being put to death by calmly asking the person who's supposed to kill him, hey, why is this so urgent and hasty? Verses 16 and 17, Daniel says, And Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time, that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his three companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision, so Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Now, verse 16 says, So Daniel went in and asked the king. Apparently, Daniel's position in the court gave him immediate access. Now, later on, he's going to ask to be taken to the king. But remember, he's under a death sentence. But right here, he went in to see the king. And he said he desired of the king. He says he made a request to the king. His friends be given, that he and his friends be given time, and that he might be able to show the king. He says, give us a chance. We're not like these other men of your court. We have a different source, and all we need is an opportunity. So God now has set the stage, put Daniel in a position, given him the intelligence, given him the position, and given him the opportunity. Again, why? Because in Daniel 1:27 it says, As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So all Daniel needed was the opportunity to be put before him. So if Daniel is able to fulfill Nebuchadnezzar's request or demand, if Daniel can tell the content of the dream and its meaning, then Nebuchadnezzar will be faced with positive proof that, one, his counselors are full of it and they're not able to do anything, but also that there's only one true God of Israel who is real and has the power to provide the answer to his question. In verse 17 through 24, Daniel is confident that God will answer his prayer and the prayer of his friends. That's what he said when he went in and made known. He says, that they might seek the mercies from God. This is prayer. He and his 3 friends are in prayer to God to reveal to them the content of the dream and the meaning. And it says that then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So, excuse me. Verse 17 says, he made the decision known to his 3 companions that they might seek the mercies. In other words, go into prayer. The secret was revealed. In Numbers 12:6, it says, Then he said, Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I shall speak to him in a dream. And this is what happened. They made known their request to Jehovah, and he revealed the information to Daniel in a dream. So in verse 19 it says, So Daniel was blessed. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Here's the key point in here. It's not that he has the opportunity. He goes to God. God reveals to him the answer to the question. But the key point is in verse 19, he says, Daniel blessed the God of heaven. God in heaven, this title is used 4 times in this chapter alone. and nowhere else in the book of Daniel. It's a common title for God. It's also found in Genesis, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Jonah. It is used to emphasize that only God knows all things and is capable of revealing the mystery of the universe. The Babylonian wise men had already admitted in verse 10 that they could not answer the king. They said there's no man on earth who can answer the king's question. Daniel with his friends go to God in prayer. He reveals the secret to them. And verse 23 says, Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. These verses tell us who God is and why we should be blessing God for any blessing that we get and be thankful. He says, for wisdom and might are his. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes the kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. He says, I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we ask of you, for you have made known to us the king's request. He validates God as to who and what he is, and then he thanks him and praises him. Daniel answered and said, the word answered, where it says answered, does not imply that he's replying to something said to him. Going back, it says, in verse 20, it says, Daniel answered and said. He's not answering God. He's not answering the king. What he's doing is responding to a situation. The meaning is that that Daniel responded to the goodness which God manifested and gave a response in regard to his feelings in the appropriate expressions of praise. In other words, it wasn't that something was, he received the dream, he got the answer, but what Daniel's doing is he responded to the goodness of God by saying, blessed be the name of God, meaning God, not just his name, but meaning the entirety of God. It is common in the Bible to give praise to God in view of the important revelations or in view of great mercies, such as the song of praise from Moses after the passage of the Red Sea in Isaiah 12, verses 1 through 6. Daniel praised God for his power and might. He said he changes things, he removes, he knows. Then he praised God for his communication to man. He gave, he revealed. Daniel had the certainty of faith to believe that God gave him the answer. He says, you have given, you have made known to us. He acknowledged all points of that dream. He acknowledged all points of what God can and has done for him. Now verses 21 and 22 qualified everything in verse 20. God's power and might. He has world events under his control. He removes kings and sits others on their thrones. He gives wise men their wisdom, scholars their intelligence. He reveals profound mysteries beyond man's understanding. He knows all hidden things. And in verse 23, Daniel gives thanks again and praise for his wisdom and his might. Verse 24, therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men, which included Daniel and his friends. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Daniel tells Arioch, the head executioner, not to destroy the wise men. Here, the pagan counselors of Nebuchadnezzar's court are shown mercy by Daniel, or through Daniel. They're seeing God's mercy through Daniel. And he tells them that he needs to go before the king to reveal the interpretation of the dream. Verses 25 through 26, then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captains of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, and are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Now Arioch said, I have found a man. He seems to imply that he was taking credit for finding someone with an answer to the king's dream, where actually Daniel came to him. He's implying that Daniel will make known. So Arioch's taking a lot of credit here for something he didn't really do. Verses 27 through 29, Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king, but there is a God. Daniel makes it clear that this is not coming from him. He makes it clear that there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the later days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what will come to pass after this, and he who reveals the secrets has made known to you what will be. Daniel makes it clear that man, specifically the king's counselors, the wise men, the astrologers, magicians, soothsayers, were not able to answer the mystery of the king's thing. This is not the only time that the wise men, astrologers, and all those will prove to be worthless. We'll see that in Daniel 4:7 and Daniel 5:7 and 8. And in verse 28 he says, but there is a God in heaven to direct the mind of the monarch. In other words, to direct the king's mind, he says, but there is a God in heaven. There is a true God. He's telling the king, these people can't do it for you. Their gods couldn't help them. Their deities couldn't help. Their incantations couldn't help them. But my God, the true God, acknowledged what your dream was and the interpretation. He's steering God. He's planting that seed in King Nebuchadnezzar of a one true God. He's making it known to the king. A better translation is, it has been made known to the king. In other words, he can't deny it. I've laid it out before you. And at this point, the king does not know the whole story. He probably is aware of some of the aspects of the dream, but he's not been told the significance of the dream yet. But part of what Daniel says is what will be in the later days, or is better known to us as the end times. Nebuchadnezzar's dream didn't just concern himself and his kingdom, but future times, a time to come. This phrase often has special reference to the times of the Messiah as the last dispensation of the king of the things on earth, or as another which the affairs of the world will wind up. In other words, how we're going to end up in the end of times. In verse 29, Daniel tells the king that he had dreamed of the coming events and that God, who reveals the secrets, was speaking to him. So that's the end, except for verse 30 says, but as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, that you may know the thoughts of your heart. So Daniel assures the king that he has not revealed the interpretation because he's wiser than any living person, but because God has showed it to me for the king's benefit. The rest of chapter 2 is into the interpretation of that dream. So I leave you with this little piece of trivia knowledge. We're in the month of November. The word November comes from the Latin word novum, which means 9, because this has been the 9th month in the early Roman calendar. So we're in the 11th month of the year, but the name never changed because it means 9. Have a great weekend.